Almost nobody today eats the wild leaf that actually fed most of Europe for centuries. Yet we still trust spinach like it's the healthiest green on earth. Here's the twist. The vegetable you see in every store wasn't even the top pick for your medieval ancestors. Want to know which weed beats spinach at its own game? Today, I'm showing you the green nobody dares to grab. Let me ask you something. Would you recognize the food that kept your ancestors alive if it was growing beside your fence right now? If that question bothers you in a good way, subscribe. Because this channel is about the foods history quietly depended on, not the ones marketing chose for us. In medieval markets, you'd skip spinach for this wild leaf, right? Archaeologists found evidence of nettle stew in Britain and Ireland from about 3,000 years ago. That alone tells you this plant was not some extra food. It was real, everyday survival eating, long before tidy farms and packaged greens. Picture a medieval market around 1400, mud everywhere, loud voices, and baskets of greens that look half dead by midday. Then, one basket stands out, because the leaves sting the second you touch them. Why would anyone buy a plant that punishes you for grabbing it? People did it because they knew the sting was temporary. Young nettle leaves lose their sting after hot water hits them. One quick blanch, and that "don't touch me" plant turns into a normal cooked green. After that, it behaves a lot like spinach, just without needing a farm or a price tag. The nutrition made it worth the effort. One cooked cup gives about 37% of your daily calcium, which is more than triple what spinach gives. It also carries more iron, magnesium, zinc, and potassium. Vitamin C can reach up to 4 times spinach. It also brings vitamin A, protein, and fiber, without much fat or calories. So, when nettle showed up beside bread in a market, it was not there as a prank. It was cheap strength that people could turn into a meal fast. The scary part is how much it mattered when winter dragged on and food got thin. Now imagine trying to find that same green when winter has already eaten your pantry. A village by a 1400 castle lived on this one weed all winter. Late March hit the hunger gap, and families felt it hard. Granaries were low, pickled foods were mushy, and fresh greens were gone. Bread and salty meat carried you, but they did not keep you feeling good. Nettle shows up early, before most edible greens appear. It grows in ditches, along fences, beside barns, and in the messy edges where animals and people move. Those places look useless, but the timing makes the nettle priceless. Old stories and cookbooks describe nettle soup and stew as spring savors in parts of northern Europe. Not because it tasted fancy, but because it arrived when people needed it most. Kids often went out to snip the tender top inches before the stems toughened. They cooked the young tops, then threw them into a pot with oats or barley. That soup did more than fill a bowl. It brought vitamin C after winter months, iron when bodies felt drained, and fiber that helped digestion wake up again. That first warm green meal could feel like your body finally switched back on. The big question sits right there. Who taught people to trust nettle when it stings so aggressively? The answer starts showing up in places where plants were watched, written about, and used on purpose. Now here's where it gets real. This wasn't a quirky side dish, it was a lifeline. When cupboards emptied and spring felt late, nettle showed up first. Next, we'll see who kept it close, wrote it down, and turned it into a routine. You ever think a monk's garden hit a better green than your store? A monk named Walafrid Strabo wrote about nettles bothering him in the 800s. That detail matters, because it shows nettles were close enough to be part of daily garden life, not some rare wild find. Monasteries worked like early hospitals and pharmacies. They grew plants they believed were useful, even if the plants were annoying. Nettles fit that mindset because they could be food and more than food. Cooked nettle was treated as safe, while raw nettle was seen as risky. Some writers described cooked nettle as helping the gut feel clearer. Nettle also had a practical role in food making. Some used nettle leaves to help curdle milk for cheese when animal rennet was not available. That matters in a world where keeping food from spoiling was a constant battle. Nettles also loved the monastery environment. They thrive in rich ground near animal pens, compost piles, and trash heaps. So the places that looked messy were the places that grew the strongest patches. That pattern explains why nettle kept following humans through history. Humans created the kind of soil it wanted, and nettle paid them back with food and utility. Once that idea clicks, it makes sense that fighters and hard workers would treat nettle like a resource too. And once a plant is useful in a monastery, it doesn't stay behind those walls for long. Knights trained on this iron-heavy leaf. So why did your fridge forget? 100 grams of cooked nettle can give 3 to 4 grams of protein, almost 7 grams of fiber, and only about 42 calories. That is a strong reason it kept ending up in pots, especially for people who needed energy without wasting precious supplies. A knight in training had no modern recovery routine. Food was whatever built strength and kept you moving. Soldiers and workers relied on bread, beans, ale, and greens that grew wild. Nettle soup was useful because it brought minerals like iron and calcium with almost no cost. Nettle also did something spinach cannot. Textile experts say nettle stems contain bast fiber that can be spun into yarn as strong as flax. In parts of Scandinavia, nettle fiber was used into the 1700s. So the same plant could feed you and also become cloth. Pain relief was rough back then. Some used urtication, whipping arms and legs with nettle to push blood flow. It sounds harsh because life is harsh. The point is that nettle was treated like a multi-purpose tool. Spinach needs travel and storage, and it loses value while it sits. Nettles can be picked and cooked immediately. That difference matters most in regular homes, where cooking needs to be fast, simple, and cheap. Still, the real test wasn't war or training. It was whether regular families could cook it fast. Your great-grandma's medieval stew used this in 10 minutes, remember? Wild food guides say nettle can go from picked to eaten in about 10 to 15 minutes. That speed explains why it stayed common. When money is tight and the garden is empty, quick food wins. Food historians say nettle soup is still eaten in Scandinavia, the UK, and parts of Eastern Europe. It stayed because it worked. People rush to pick it in April and May when the shoots were tender. Wait too long and it turns tougher and bitter, so timing matters. Old cookbooks keep the method simple. Cook the young tops. After that, it acts like a normal green. For poor families, those free greens meant vitamin A, iron, and calcium without spending anything. Nettle has also been written about for a very long time. It shows up in ancient Greek and Roman sources and in medieval leech books, giving it a record of about 2,000 years of repeated use. Daily eating is the calm part of the story. Things get darker when sickness hits and people start reaching for plants in a totally different way. And when food isn't the only problem and sickness shows up, nettle stops being just dinner. A plague-time healer trusted this bitter leaf. Don't you wonder why? Researchers found 139 old medical recipes that used nettle. That number matters because it shows repetition. People kept returning to nettle in serious situations, not just once out of curiosity. During plague times, medicine was limited. Healers used what they had: nettle leaves, honey, oil, vinegar. Some treatments were simple plasters, mixing nettle with honey or oil and applying it to the skin. The vinegar detail stands out. Soaking nettle in vinegar and applying it to wounds could help the vinegar penetrate. Vinegar can kill bacteria like Staphylococcus aureus, which was one of the worst infections people faced. Medieval healers did not know the science, but they watched what helped and copied it. Other herbals mentioned nettle for swelling, joint pain, kidney stones, and skin problems. Modern studies still look at nettle extracts for swelling and pain, which helps explain why nettle stayed in the medical conversation for so long. So nettle sat in both the cooking pot and the healer's kit. That leads straight into the money pressure because peasants did not only fight sickness, they fought bills. Even if a plant might help, none of that matters if you can't afford food in the first place. With food prices crazy, would a medieval peasant laugh at your plate? Medieval families paid rent and taxes, and grain prices could crush them. That pressure made wild food a smart move. If something edible grew outside your door, it could lower the risk of going hungry. Wild food experts say nettles are still survival food in poorer regions today. You'll usually spot it close to old paths and busy edges, where soil stays well fed. Once you learn the leaf shape, the patches stand out quickly, and gathering a basket becomes simple. Store greens travel far, then fade on the shelf. This leaf comes straight from the hedge to the pot, so what you eat stays strong. Foraging skills fade as people move to cities, and the knowledge that used to live inside families gets lost. A strange flip happens now. Some restaurants sell nettle soup for high prices, while fewer people actually know how to gather it. What used to be normal becomes trendy, and the real skill disappears. Nettle also acts like a signpost in the landscape. A thick patch can point to where people lived and dumped waste long ago, which makes the plant feel like a clue you can still see today. And the last twist is, nettle doesn't just feed people. It quietly marks where people lived. If this ditchweed grew by old castle walls, what are you missing? Botanists call nettle a nitrogen indicator. It loves soil enriched by waste, compost, and old garbage. So a big nettle patch near ruins is not always random. It can point to where people dumped scraps, kept animals, or emptied chamber pots. That turns nettle into a quiet map. The plant grows where humans live messy lives because those habits created the soil it wants. Medieval people would notice that. A nettle patch could mean food, medicine, and a useful spot right where life happened. Ethnobotanists warn that wild gathering is fading even while restaurants hype it. A 2026 review highlighted that shift, and it explains why nettle feels like it sits between two worlds: old survival knowledge and modern forgetfulness. Nettle fed people, got used in healing, and even turned into cloth. It still grows in the same kinds of places, still free, still ignored by most people. A plant that stings this hard should have been easy to hate and forget. Instead, it stayed useful for thousands of years, which makes one question hard to dodge. What other worthless things are sitting nearby, waiting for someone to recognize them? If any part of this story made you rethink what superfood really means, tell us your thoughts below. And when you're ready for the next wild secret, just tap the next video. See you there.